it's one of the worst miscalculations ever conducted in modern warfare. If you compare it, to other wars previously, and if you compare it to other parts of the energy wars, because this is a chapter of the energy wars we're currently experiencing between China and the US. But if you look specifically on this chapter, they do every single mistake possible. They're attacking the GCC, they're attacking Cyprus, they're trying to involve the European Union, they're trying to involve other countries in the region. In addition to the fact that they're closing the straits, in addition to the fact that they're trying to create havoc in Pakistan so that can affect India, they're trying to essentially drag the entire world into their specific conflict instead of just accepting the conditions that President Trump imposed on them. They legitimately thought they can get out of this negotiations with their hands, on top of everything. And part of their hubris is the fact that they know that it's not possible.
Hello and welcome to a new episode from our podcast East to West. And today we are speaking about the energy wars in the context of the conflict between Israel, US, and Iran, and how could that actually affect the outcome of this conflict. And to speak about this, I have with me Ella Rosenberg, an expert on Iran and terror financing, and also a senior fellow at JCFA. Hello, Ella.
Good morning.
We're talking about energy wars. And what do you mean by that? When I asked you, what should we talk about? And you said energy wars. What do you mean by that in the context of the current conflict exactly?
It's actually quite simple. So if you take the current situation and you zoom out, you look at it on a macro level, you basically see that you have two main fragments on this specific conflict. You have Iran, and on the other hand, you have the Sunni states, meaning the GCC, and the United States. In that context, if you take away Israel as a country or part of this conflict, you will have essentially a situation which you have one country, which is Iran, against a different specific set of countries fighting on energy. What is that energy? Meaning the oil and also the gas, in addition to the maritime straits in Iran. Specifically, when you're discussing the current escalation between Israel, the United States, and Iran, you can also see that if you put it together in one context, you see essentially that it's a fight against who will, at a certain point after the conflict is over, will have control over the energy in the Middle East. And controlling energy in the Middle East, in a certain sense, means world domination.
And you mean that part of US's objective is also controlling the Strait of Hormuz, the oil fields in Iran, and also, of course, Iran wants to keep that in order to gain leverage against Arab countries, against world powers, including the US.
Precisely. So if you look at it at a more strategic level, of course, one of the objectives of the war is to make sure that the Iranian regime, or specifically the RAGC, will not have any sort of control after the war. But the main objective, in my opinion, for the US is to make sure that the energy levels worldwide are dominated by the US. In that sense, Iran made a very strategic mistake, but also a tactical mistake, attacking the GCC in a way that they might have considered that the GCC will then pressure President Trump to make sure that the war stops. The exact opposite happened. The GCC countries took into consideration the situation and said, if Iran is already attacking me almost indefinitely, in addition to the fact that they're also attacking energy levels and energy sources, you can see the recent attack on Aramco, they took a side with the United States, and now they're facing the Iranian regime together.
And the Strait of Hormuz is also effectively closed, let's say, because we're hearing conflicting, statements from Iran. IRGC says something, and then the president says something else. The foreign minister, Arakji, says something else. How will that affect the conflict after all? Because, after all, we're talking here about the fifth of the world energy that passes through that strait.
Yes. So specifically regarding that point, you need to bear in mind that once you close the straits, it creates a situation in which Iran is trying to control its own oil leverage and also oil distribution, in addition to the fact that they're trying to make sure that the US and the other Sunni states, but also the GCC, will have a situation that they will not impose any sort of conditions on Iran. To an extent that if you think about it even further, you need to bear in mind that once you close the straits, You essentially close the oil distribution. And if you close the oil distribution, it affects India, it affects Pakistan, it affects the European Union, it affects also the US. So to that specific level, and of course China, and you also see it with the shadow fleet. Because now that the straits are closed, what does it mean for the shadow fleet? What does it mean specifically on how the Iranian regime is trying to fund itself? What does it mean in the sense that how do they create a situation in which they have some sort of a distribution of funds, but also a distribution of their own power?
So we're saying that Iran is actually hurting itself and hurting its allies as well. China, as one of the biggest, or is the biggest importer of energy in the world, and specifically from the Strait of Hormuz as well.
You would be very surprised, but yes, in the one end, you would expect that they would like to have the straits open so they can continue funding their own regime in the sense that they send their oil into China through vis-a-vis the shadow fleet. But to that extent, they're closing it, meaning that they can't fund itself. They can't fund the sale of oil, and the Chinese will not receive the oil.
Calculation that they are doing, because strategically speaking, they are assuming that the Arab countries or the world will see that the price of the war is too high, and that's why the war should stop. That's how to force the U.S. to stop the war. That's the assumption. Is this a miscalculation, you're saying?
It's not a miscalculation. It's one of the worst miscalculations ever conducted in modern warfare. If you compare it, to other wars previously, and if you compare it to other parts of the energy wars, because this is a chapter of the energy wars we're currently experiencing between China and the US. But if you look specifically on this chapter, they're doing every single mistake possible. They're attacking the GCC. They're attacking Cyprus. They're trying to involve the European Union. They're trying to involve other countries in the region. In addition to the fact that they're closing the straits, in addition to the fact that they're trying to create havoc in Pakistan so that can affect India, they're trying to essentially drag the entire world into their specific conflict instead of just accepting the conditions that President Trump imposed on them. They legitimately thought they can get out of this negotiations with their hands, on top of everything. And part of their hubris is the fact that they know that it's not possible.
And one more way to affect Iran's, exporting capabilities, not only closing the Strait of Hormuz or, sieging in the sea, is also attacking their oil fields. After all, this is the, source of that oil. And Israel seems to have started doing it. We still don't have full, understanding of the context of these attacks, because some are saying that these are actually oil fields that are used only by the RGC. Others are saying this is also affecting the people of Iran. How do you see that happening following the developing updates?
Well, currently there's a lot of miscommunication, but also a lot of misinformation regarding the attack of either the oil fields or the specific oil refineries in Tehran. You can see information coming from both sides. One side saying it did happen, other side saying it happened no, in a worse degree. The interesting thing about it is that this cloud of misinformation is trying to essentially hide the mere fact of whether it was hindered or not. So once either the US or Israel, it's still really unclear, decided to attack the oil field with also the oil refineries, it's essentially a death sentence to the Iranian regime. And they started coming once they started attacking the GCC countries. Because at the first day of the war, when they started attacking Dubai and Abu Dhabi and Riyadh and other countries in the GCC area, it was very clear that the regime will fall for the mere fact that they made the strategic and tactical mistake of attacking one of the US's clear and not undefined, but I would say more strategic partner in the region, which is the GCC countries, for the level of energy and for the level of oil and gas. Because once they did that, they thought, well, maybe those countries will pressure President Trump to an extent that they'll stop the war, and the exact opposite happened. Now, if you look at what President Trump is trying to do now, or either Israel, it's really unclear, they're trying to attack the oil fields and the oil refineries to have a counter effect to what the Iranian regime did to Aramco in Saudi Arabia. It's essentially
It has been reported yesterday that the U.S. is not happy, quote unquote, with Israel's attack on the oil refineries. Do you think this is the case, or this is, the U.S. trying to say
I
that
think
it's Israel and distancing itself from that?
it can be one of the other, but you need to bear in mind that it's of the US interest to make sure that these oil fields and oil refineries remain intact. So once the regime will fall, they will have some sort of control over it, whether directly or indirectly. But you also need to bear in mind that if you look at the attack itself, even if the refineries fall, even if the oil fields are bombed to the ground, well, you can still renew them and you can still create a situation that it's rebuilt. But for that, the United States will have to invest a lot of money. Something that's under the current administration of President Trump will not go very well with the Republican Party.
Mhm. And also, there is the shadow fleet. The U.S. has been continually attacking ships that belong to Iran, warships specifically, even the drones carrier that they have announced a few years ago. But is there a targeting of the shadow fleet? Because this is also one more way to harm the Iranian regime without, interfering, directly with the oil prices and the oil flow in the Strait of Hormuz.
It's one of the best ways to. I'm not an expert in minimizing regimes or abolishing them, but the one thing I can tell you is that from the minute in January that the sanctions were enforced on a larger extent and the demonstrations started. And then all of a sudden you have lack of proper economic infrastructure within Iran. And then it's like some sort of snowball that's growing and growing. Not only the people were suffering, but also the regime. Once you cut off the shadow fleet, it's also, as I said, that sentence to the Iranian regime, because they can't fund itself. They can't, bring more money into the states, because how does the Iranian regime fund itself? Through forex, through oil, through crypto, and through also human trafficking. So to that specific effect, if you look around and you see what you can do, the economic pressure that is currently being handled should have been handled years ago and months ago, and should have been enforced in a much greater extent, not only by the US, but also by the European Union. And this entire havoc that's currently happening in Iran is partly to blame because of the European Union, because if they have enforced sanctions at the time, and if they have imposed specific designations at the time, we wouldn't have been in this situation. People of the tens of thousands will not have been killed in Iran, and the world order would have been in peace. But for them, it was much easier just to close their eyes and shut their eyes to the specific economic developments happening in the Middle East, because their specific policy of not interfering is not helpful.
And let's say that the shadow fleet is gone, and also the U.S. is, blocking any Iranian ships from exporting oil. How would that regime, if it survives this war,
It won't
continue?
survive the war, hopefully, but yes.
Let's think about it this way. I mean, after all, the protest that the U.S. and Israel hopes to happen, it might take a while. It might take, some sort of a conflict, internal conflict inside Iran. This will be, months maybe, or could be, more than that. But after all, the Iranian regime has different ways also to fund itself. If that shadow fleet gone and their oil export revenue is gone, how will it continue, do you think?
I don't think it will. Because once you diminish or at least minimize the export of oil, it's a death sentence to the Iranian regime. Because for them, oil is not just a commodity that they trade, in which they give to terror groups and then they sell it over. It's not just a way of creating a situation that the Chinese are closer to them. It's a methodology of everything. It's a currency, it's a good, it's a method of controlling the world, and it's also a method of controlling the energy wars. Once you minimize that, then you don't have the ability to control the energy wars, and the GCC and the United States win.
And maybe one last question. I guess the Iranians, with their what we are seeing right now, madman operation, will say that in case I can't export my oil and make money, no one else should. Is this a scenario that the U.S., Israel, the Gulf countries are prepared for, to, be exposed to continuous Iranian attacks on the oil fields in Saudi Arabia, in the United Arab Emirates, in Qatar, and all of these places?
The underlying question that you're essentially asking is that they should unite, if they should unite and create a Justice League in energy. Wholeheartedly, yes. There should be some sort of maritime geopolitical agreement in a sense that will create a union at the end of the day between these countries to protect them against rogue countries in the region, whether it is Turkey, whether it is Iran, whether it is other countries that are bordering with the GCC and Israel. The main threat, and this is also a very important point, it is not in the interest of the United States and the European Union for us as a Middle East to have an economic union, because once we do have that, whether it is in the economic area, whether it is in maritime control or maritime export or energy export, we will be the largest, greatest. We will have a golden era here in the Middle East. We will be most powerful because not only we understand one another, we will also have the infrastructure for it, and we also have the the geological precautions for that, and the geological resources for that. So you need to bear in mind that, in my opinion, if you would like to solve it on a more long-term basis, there should be room for us as Israel and for this and for Saudi Arabia and for the UAE and Bahrain and other countries within the hopefully Middle Eastern Union to come about and speak about how we see ourselves in the region, because we can't be controlled anymore either by Iran or the United States or, God forbid, the European Union.
All right. Ella Rosenberg, expert in Iran and terror financing and a senior fellow at JCFA. Thank you so much for being with us and explaining all that to us.
Thank you. Thank you.